next session we're having of meeting. Well, usually it's meeting authors. In this case, we're meeting, well, in case of Lezli, she is an author. We're also meeting a publisher. In this case, that's Shahid. I have known both Shahid and Lezli for a number of years now. I didn't meet them at the same time. I met Lezli at a science fiction convention, which I'm thinking was either WindyCon or DragonCon, but I won't swear to it. She was at that time collaborating with Mike Resnick, who was a friend of mine and also a collaborator of mine. And I met both of them at the same convention. She was not then, as far as I know, and hooked up with Shahid. I don't believe so. Shahid I met, I'm not quite sure how the connection got started. I think it was through Mike Resnick, but
yes, it was.
That, Shahid. Shahid had launched an imprint. I'm going to let him explain the structure of his publishing house because it's. I'll let him explain it, but he has an imprint called Phoenix Pick, which he launched with Mike. Mike was the editor of it, and the idea behind it was that take two authors and establish one a new author, and have them do long novellas or short novels together that were connected as a way, basically, to some degree, introducing the new author to the public at large. And in the case of the book I did, it was called The Ethers of Mars, and it was, my partner was Chuck Gannon, with whom I have since written a number of books. And at the time Chuck and I did it, he was a pretty new author. By the time it got published, he had actually gotten known by then, so I felt a little bit foolish saying, oh, well, he's my partner that you've never heard of. Ethers of Mars is a steampunk, well, never mind. I don't want to get into the philosophical wrangling over what steampunk means, but it's broadly steampunk setting that Chuck created based on Mars. It's called The Ethers of Mars, and it's very good, and everyone should buy it. That's how I got to know Shahid. And then after that, we've been in contact for some years. I was one of the instructors he had on a project he had going for quite a while called Sailing for Success. And we've just known each other for a long time. And I happen to just personally like both of these people. So,
that's always a good
working with them. So, you know, I've sold Mike Resnick some stories for the magazine, which we're going to talk about, that Lezli now edits, called Galaxy's Edge. Okay, enough about me. Let me start with I'd like both of you to tell our audience a little bit about yourselves personally, because you're a publisher, and Jim Bain used to always grouse that nobody paid attention to publishers, which is not true of authors, but it tends to be pretty true of everyone else. And Lezli, you're more recent than a lot of authors we have here. So please tell us about yourselves. You start, Shahid.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a different world altogether. I grew up in Pakistan. My father was an Air Force officer there, and actually a World War II vet, but he was with the Indian service back then when the British were there. And then he joined the Foreign Service, which meant as a serviceman, I used to travel around a lot with him. And I saw, saw a lot of different cultures, got exposure to a lot of things and all that. And then when I was about 12 years old, they decided that, well, I was traveling too much, not good for my academics, so sent me to a boarding school. When I finished my high school there in that good old boarding school, I actually got a scholarship to a school in New York. And my first exposure to the US was New York in the middle of, it was like early 80s, in the middle of all that crime and everything. And I remember one of the specific things in my first exposure to the US was sitting in freshman orientation and being told that if I'm going to travel around in New York, I should always have $5 or $10, especially around where I was studying, because it was around Harlem, so that if I get mugged, I don't get the muggers mad. That I was officially told by my at orientation, and that was my exposure. Anything, one thing led to another. I finished my bachelor's, I finished my master's. Best thing is I met my wife there, who actually ditched me, who I met in freshman orientation, and I tried to later, but she ditched me. But I had my final revenge. We ended up marrying each other, and she's still stuck with me after 30-some years. And then I became an investment banker, you know, your usual thing. You come from South Asia, you get a good education, you go into banking or medical or whatever. But after about 20 years, I'm a slow learner. I figured out it was the wrong business for me, and then I set up a publishing company. I basically quit one day, totally just walked out of there, you know, told my boss, thank you very much. Went from California back to Maryland and set up a publishing company. Anyway, that's a little bit about me personally. Did you want me to go into the business, or would you like?
No, actually, we will be going
Yeah.
to the business, but I want to first, Leslie,
Yeah.
let's get your introduction, and then we'll
Yeah,
get
exactly.
into the business stuff.
So much of our company is multicultural. So I'm from Australia, also not from the US. I grew up in pretty much the perfect nuclear family, but I had a twin sister, and we were both always into science fiction, fantasy books. We used to share our collection because it meant that we could double the books we could read if we half got, you know, each of the series. Of course, we realized the problem with that when we separated and moved out as an adult, because we literally had half of every collection. But yeah, I always wanted to be a writer from when I was young. I actually wrote an email to Anne McCaffrey when I was 16, and she responded, and we started corresponding about writing. And then when I was a manager of a clothing store, and I was 26, I bought a signed Anne McCaffrey book off of, it turns out I bought it from Mike Resnick. So the joke is that I would say on panels and that is I bought my collaborator off eBay. You know, that was the sort of running joke because, you know, that's how we met. And he just started talking to me and saying, I met Anne McCaffrey back when, and all of this. And we started going back and forth. And so my introduction to my new career, both sides of it, is very unusual because he sent me his books when he realized I hadn't read his fiction. He's like, we can't have that. And me not knowing what to sort of do, but to thank him, I critiqued them, which apparently is something you don't usually get.
Especially with award-winning books.
Yeah.
No, sure, of course.
Yeah, but I was like, well, I want him to know that I read them and things like that, like I was valuing the gift, right? And he didn't say much, but he kept sending me more books. I'm like, this is becoming my second full-time job. And then about after 3 or 4 months, he said, you've been spotting things my editors haven't spotted. And you would be, I think, a really good writer. And so he tried to convince me to write. However, I didn't want him to think I was just talking to him to get a writing career, because I had expressed I did want to write. And so I said, no. And so then he tried another tact, invited me to my first convention, which was Denvention Worldcon in 2008. And this sole purpose was to spam me with signed books from all his friends, and then tell me at the end of the con, now, wouldn't you want to be on the bookshelves with all these people? He got me that many signed books. I had 40 books to send home before, because they definitely was too heavy for my luggage. So then it was Lee Modisett, who I met trying to get books signed for my sister, because she's one of his biggest fans. And he had seen me going around with Mike and said, take him up on his offer. He's known for helping new writers. He has writer children. And so he said, it's not a bad thing if he's offering, you're not taking advantage, you know, and so forth. So that's how we became collaborators. And then obviously Mike and I actually sold a book to Shahid.
Yes.
And so we'd sold a book before I worked with Shahid. And it was in that Stellar Guild series, which I'm sure will get mentioned a bit later, that you'd mentioned earlier. And because of that, I obviously got to know Shahid. And Shahid was watching me sort of interact with people at cons and all of this sort of stuff. And I was at the time working at a bank in Ohio. And that's when he eventually offered me the job that brings us to today.
Okay. Shahid, I know you explained to me once why that you got into publishing has been something you've been thinking of doing for a long time. And while your previous career was, you made plenty of money at it, it was not really what you wanted to do. Why did you pick science fiction in particular? Or science fiction and fantasy, but
It's something, I grew up, like I said, in Pakistan. And one of the advantages of being an ex-British colony is you get British books. You know, you have bookstores which are in English and they provide them. We didn't get a whole ton of science fiction, but we would get some of them. And, you know, especially the big names and all that. You know, they're all published through British publishing houses, even American authors, and they would get to Pakistan. And I just loved reading those science fiction stories. In fact, I had a deal with my local bookstore owner there. This is a little corner bookstore, that every science fiction book he would get, he'd keep one copy aside for me. And when I could, I would go and buy them. So that's where I would spend all my, you know, allowances and all that. I think I got into Star Trek, like many of us, through science fiction through Star Trek. Because my earliest, my father really liked watching science fiction movies and stuff. And Star Trek, one of my earliest memories is actually getting special permission from my mother to watch Star Trek with my father, because it used to come on late in Pakistan and it was on a school night. And the show just blew me away, you know, and it's, just think about it. It's such a removed world from what we know. And from Pakistan, it was 2 times as removed. I mean, it was just something totally out there. And it just kind of appealed to me. So when I started reading science fiction. And, you know, when I had my little midlife crisis, the choice was buying a, you know, your typical red Corvette, whatever, or choosing a more expensive option, which is going into publishing.
I better say, it would have been more prudent to buy the Corvette, yeah.
Yeah. So I decided, okay, and keep in mind, this is, I set the ArcManor up in 2006. That's when a lot of very exciting things were happening in publishing. I've been very interested in technology, generally. And you had ebook starting, you had POD coming up, you had this whole thing going on. And I said, you know what? I love books. Let's see what I can do with books. You know, if I you know, doing something I really love. So that's the deal I made with my wife. I said, I'm going to quit my job, something totally crazy. I had a great job. But I figured I would die with a, you know, of a heart attack, and my kids would probably enjoy all that money, not myself. So it was time to quit. And she said, okay, you can do your crazy thing for a few years. If it works, it works. If not, you go get back a job. I had kids to put through college, and, you know, we all have responsibility. Right. So in 2006, I set up, and then obviously, since I love science fiction, that's what I went to. And basically, soon after I set up, I got in touch with some of the authors I had read earlier on and who were out of print. Not big names, but still, you know, people who've been published by Bantam and, you know, Dow, whatever, but they were no longer in print. And after, you know, them telling me, who the heck are you and why the heck should we give you a book? 1 or 2 of them actually agreed and gave me some books, and that was the start. And here I am.
Okay, now explain, because I actually want to know, because I've never really been quite clear on it, even though I get royalty checks from you, but I've gotten them for quite a while now. Explain what ArcManor is and how you have your business structured.
Okay.
You have both a publishing house, you now also, for some years now, have had a magazine, Galaxy's Edge. Please just, if you could, I'm curious myself, because I really don't know. If you could explain how it works.
At its heart, ArcManor is a tiny company. It is, right now, you're looking at the whole company. It's Lezli and me, 2 full-time workers. But we do a lot of things. And I think the secret to that is we work with a lot of, like a core group of people, freelancers all over the place. My sister runs a typesetting service in Pakistan. I have a POD proofer who's very good at comparing PODs with original text in Serbia. My ebook guy is in Turkey. Then you've got editors all over the US. My assistant is from Australia. Like Lezli said, truly a multinational network. So that's a core. But the business itself, actually, with the help of all these people, has ArcManor is almost becoming like a holding company. Because within that, what we have is we actually, a totally separate function is we provide typesetting and book design services to clients, which has nothing to do with the publishing services. Like, anybody wanting to have the book design can come us, pay us a fee, and we'll design the book for them. And the
we can
reason
do everything in
is because we have all these services in place, and a lot of them are not used all the time. So we have the contacts, and we just act as an intermediary, create basically, it's a US-based company that can, which also gives comfort to clients. That's one side. On the publishing side, then ArcManor does a bunch of other type. We also do non-science fiction. We've done a lot of, we supply books to some schools. We do a lot of public domain books and all that. And then one of the main imprints of ArcManor is Phoenix Pick, which is where you would come in.
Yeah, that's right, Ken, right.
And that was set up primarily as a POD and an ebook imprint for science fiction.
Yeah.
And Stellar Guild was a part of that. It was basically an idea that came out of that. Even though it wasn't reprints, it was still done through POD and ebooks. And basically, it was basically, with Mike and I came up with the idea that we pair new authors with a veteran.
That's Phoenix Pick.
Yeah, that was Stellar Guild.
I'm not clear.
Basically a line of Phoenix Pick, yes, sir.
Okay, what I've never actually been clear on it is what's the distinction you're making between Phoenix Pick and Stellar Guild?
There was none. Stellar Guild was a line published by Phoenix Pick.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Okay. As is Galaxy Jet. Phoenix Pick has basically become the science fiction overall imprint.
Okay.
Which publishes Galaxy's Edge magazine.
Okay.
Which published the Stellar Guild series and a few other things. But lately, this year, we have actually set up a totally separate imprint called Kasich.
I knew you'd set up a new one, but so explain what Kasich is, because that I don't know. I've never had any contact with it.
Because the first book to be published under that was in March. The point of Kasich is it is set up on a more traditional line. It is represented through Ingram Publisher Services. It goes into all the bookstores. It's got traditional printing. And my timing was absolutely brilliant on that. It was March 24th was the launch of our new imprint, so we could get into all the bookstores which had shut down by then because of the COVID virus. Anyway.
Terrible time in Shahid. Terrible.
Yes. And that is now doing actually a lot of new works by a lot. Basically, that's going to basically publish the new science fiction that we are publishing, not reprints. Totally separate from Phoenix.
Through Kasich. Okay. All right. I'm curious, by the way, we also have a panel at this convention on where is publishing going, that Shahid and I both on with other people. But I'll just add, I have my own publishing house. I do not try to go through Ingram and get in the bookstores. And the reason is because I don't want to deal with returns.
Yes.
Because even when I was a young man, and I'm not any longer, I would not have enjoyed schlepping up and down stairs from my basement, hauling books back and forth. So, well, never mind. I'm not going to bring it up here. I'm going to pick your brains as to how you handle that because, you're not a big publisher with the Ford, staff and the whole shop that does that work for you. But I'm just wondering about that because that really, in a lot of ways, is, I think, anyway, the dividing line between a major commercial publisher and what I think of as a small press is. Now, I know small presses do go through Ingram and publish, but I don't quite know how that would be worth it's not the money, it's the effort you got to put into, handling.
It's actually not
the money. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Shahid has actually said that the Kazakh imprint has basically become a full-time job for him. So
Yes.
part of what I'm doing for him is taking over more of the Phoenix Pick side.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah.
the best way to condense what the two sides are is the Phoenix Picks have like short sellers, but more the reprints, more the classics, more
Yeah.
and obviously it's just the holding company for the magazine and things. Whereas Kazakh is like the new, bright, new, shiny titles that we can have more of a risk on in putting through a national market and hopefully have less returns on, basically.
Yeah, and
Okay. All right.
really, I'm with you. I mean, this whole publishing model is absurd. I mean, and I eschewed it for a long time. But then it's kind of grown out of, for better or for worse, as a small publisher, as a 2-person publisher, look at the authors we deal with.
Yeah.
My lineup for Kazakh, which it's been the new book by Heinlein.
Right. I'm going to ask you about that in a minute. But
yeah, the one Robert Sawyer's, the Oppenheimer Alternative.
Right.
Got paper rights. The next book we are publishing is an anthology. You will love the cover, Eric. I don't know if I sent it to you. I will. It's an anthology by it's of 3 novellas by Harry Turtle, James Murrow, and Cat Rambo.
okay. All right. Now wait a minute. Oh, that sounds fascinating. What is it again? It's 3 novellas.
It's 3 novellas, and the premise is that Mr. Trump and the Republicans win the next few election cycles, and the consequences of that. Now, if you know anything about Harry Turtledove, what I told him, and I may regret having said that to him, I told him, have fun with the novella. And he looked at me and he said, no publisher's ever told me that before. I had to get multiple legal opinions on the novella.
I know both Harry and Kat. I don't know the Morrow, but she'll have fun with it too.
Yes.
I think if I remember, didn't you ask me if I could write something for it? And I told you I was just too jammed up at the time.
Exactly, because I know your sentiments would be very much in line with
No, I would have had fun with that. Yeah, it's part of what I do with my own publishing house. Is I don't want to go very much into that because it's not the subject of this panel, but because I have an anchor in the 1632 series, which kind of stabilizes it financially. Other than I just kind of publish whatever I damn well feel like, or me or my editors like. And you know, if it sells, great. If it doesn't, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. And I want the authors to enjoy what they're doing, just because that's what I like to do. Let me ask you, when did you launch Galaxy's Edge? I don't remember. I remember when Mike Resnick, who was original editor, approached me very, very early on, because he basically said, Eric, what I'm doing is I'm trying to put together stories by established authors that are basically reprints, and basically they're friends of his, and Mike had a lot of friends, and he's trying to get them real cheap, so he could then afford to get stories by new authors that were new stories that he could pay. And I told him, Mike, you can have it for nothing. He said, no, I got to pay you something. I said, fine, give me $50. I don't care. I mean, it's just, you know, I don't know how to put this. All the short fiction I write on commission, and it's almost always because a friend asked me to do it for some project. Sometimes, I write short fiction, my own settings, and I do it in David Weber's Honor Harrington universe, and those actually bring in quite a bit of money. But, you know, most short fiction I just do for the fun of it. It's and usually because, you know, someone I know, either a friend or maybe not a close friend, but somebody that I feel I owe something to, asked me, could you do it? And the problem I have is I often turn down things which I wish I could do, as I did with yours, just because I just don't have the time. Yeah. But Mike edited Galaxy's Edge. When did you launch Galaxy's Edge? I just don't remember.
2013.
March.
All right,
was the
that
first
far
issue.
back? Was it that far back? Because
We're in our 7th year. We've survived 7 years of that.
oh, I didn't realize that. Because the book that I did for you, Ethers of Mars, I just went and checked before this discussion because I couldn't remember. It came out in 2014, so yeah, Galaxy's Edge already up and running.
Yeah. We had published you in Galaxy's Edge before the Stellar Guild. I didn't know you back then because, you'd well.
Oh, well, I know the story. It was a real short little story. Mike
Yeah.
mostly just wanted to be able to put my name on the cover, I think. He says, "You got anything?" I said, "Yeah, I got this story." In fact, I never published it at that point. It'd been a story I'd written for my own entertainment long time ago. And I said, "You can have it, Mike." And so that's the one he gave me the $50. But, I hadn't realized that. I don't know. I think of Galaxy's Edge as coming after Ethers of Mars. But okay, so so it's been in existence for 7 years.
Yeah.
And Lezli, when did you become the assistant editor?
So a couple of years ago, essentially, it got to the point where Mike had bought over 300 stories for the magazine. And I'd noticed when the magazine was going to print one issue that he hadn't realized, but he'd added in a story that had previously been added like 10 issues ago. And it's because one file he hadn't deleted, obviously, from his stories. And I said to Shahid, do you have a spreadsheet of everything that's been published in which issue? And no, they didn't. So essentially, if you get to know me, I'm like the detail-oriented spreadsheet fanatic, that sort of person. And so I'm like, well, I'll create one, and that way Mike can check which stories have already been published and, which stories are still waiting in the queue. And because he invariably brought like nearly 6 months ahead for the magazine. So we had 6 months of stories ahead, 6 issues, I should say, nearly, of stories ahead, which is nearly a year. And obviously he had that massive prior list of previously published stories. And so invariably, as you can imagine, one story hiccup could happen again just because the sheer number of stories. So I started by creating the spreadsheet in that, and then I got sort of folded in. So through that process, like I would end up just checking the stories that would come through to go to the copy editor, just to make sure there was no duplications, things like that. And that was my first particular job with the magazine. It's kind of managing editor in a way or something. Yeah.
Well, there's a question I want to ask you in a minute, but while we're on this subject, if Galaxy's Edge, you've been running for 7 years, that means you're I don't know if you're making money, but certainly not losing money on it. And if people who are watching this don't know this, that is really not easy to do. Publishing a magazine, I was going to say, starting a publishing house is foolish compared to buying a Corvette. Starting a magazine is probably even more so. I have one that's been running successfully for 13 years now professionally, but it's anchored in something. It's anchored in the 1632 series. And to do one that's just, I edited Jim Baen's Universe magazine for 4 years back in, starting in 2006 through 2010. And Mike actually was my co-editor the last 2 years of it. And we just couldn't make it. We came close, but we just couldn't do it. And eventually we had to close it down. So, do you enjoy doing it?
It's a lot of work. And it's a lot of work for very little money. And some issues I don't think we even make money.
Yeah.
It's kind of breaking even is the best I would say. But I've never looked at it in isolation as a profit center. Keep in mind, my main business is publishing books.
Mm-hmm.
The original idea of the magazine came up because I write a lot of checks to advertisers and other magazines to advertise my books.
Right.
And I said, why don't I just create the darn thing myself? I tend to, And really, that's how it happened. And the reason Mike got involved in it was because Mike, as I had been working on a few things, and I went to Mike. It was on a very tight budget because keep in mind, my incentives were a little more nefarious than publishing a great magazine. I just wanted an advertising
Yeah, right.
myself. So I went to Mike. I said, I need a cheap editor because I'm not an editor. You know, my background is finance. I don't know anything about this. So he listened to me and he said, I'll do it. And that shocked me because my budget was $200 for the editor. He said, I'll do it, but here's what you need to do. You need to let me use half the magazine for new writers, and you have to pay them a reasonable rate, and
Right.
you have to pay them quickly, not wait like 6 months. That is the deal I struck with him, and that is very much Mike. Because if you knew Mike, he always bemoaned the fact that there weren't enough venues for younger writers, newer writers, especially for short fiction. As he said, there are like 3 magazines and everybody's competing with Joe Haldeman and Eric Flint and Mike Resnick to get a short story in there. So, you know, they're just enough fun. And I said, yes, and that was the start of the magazine. I had never thought back then how much of a product it would become that I would become so proud of myself as a product in itself.
Mhm.
Even if it's not making money, it is actually not losing me much money.
Yeah, right.
And the advantages I have, I think it's pretty short-sighted to just look at it in dollar and cents. You know,
I
every
agree. I agree with you.
the advantages,
absolutely
the
agree.
number of authors. I've met Orson Scott Card because of the magazine. He
Yeah.
sent in some stories.
Yeah.
George Martin sent us 3 stories, all of which we paid him $100, which is, I guess, the most.
Oh, no, that's the way it works. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the way it works.
and things like that. And as long as I'm able, unless I start losing tens of thousands of money on the magazine, this magazine is going forward. And by the way, this is the first time I'm going to let anybody know publicly. And because before this, they had not finalized this. DragonCon and I have been working on an award, which will be sponsored by Galaxy's Edge for short fiction for new writers.
Okay.
It will be given out at DragonCon. It will be called the Mike Resnick Memorial Award
All right.
for short fiction
And you're going to give it out at DragonCon?
at DragonCon.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Are you going to do this part connected with the Dragon Awards or?
It's going to be done through I'm not, they're still working on the details. As you can imagine, this has just been going on, and right now they're doing the virtual con.
Oh,
But
I know. Yeah. No, in fact,
I got the
would-
final go ahead, and they said they were going to make mention of it in virtual con, but the official announcement is going to come out probably next month sometime. But because they're going to mention it at DragonCon, they said I could mention it as well.
All right.
You know,
Fine. Now, is this an annual award?
it will be an annual award given out during the DragonCon awards themselves. So it will be part of the whole thing. But again, you know, it's going to be sponsored by Galaxy's Edge, so that's there to stay for the near future.
No, I can say, and I don't want to spend much time on this, but I completely agree with you in how I think if my publishing house starts really losing me a lot of money, I won't have any choice. I'll have to give it up. But it was actually breaking even this year. I'm losing quite a bit of money, my wife and I, but that's because we're putting a lot of money into it in the way of beefing it up, building it up, and trying to do some really aggressive promotion. Hopefully within a year, that will have increased the income enough to cover the extra costs. We'll see. But, you know, I do it for the fun of it, mostly. It's partly, well, no, never mind. I don't want to make this about myself, but I agree with you that if you go into publishing as a damn bean counter, I think you're number one an idiot, because the fact is it's a risky industry, and it's you know, I mean, you know, damn it, make washing machines or something, or something that's way more predictable than publishing is. And one of the things that drives me nuts is corporate bean counters that think you can publish books the same way you make something like washing machines, because you can't. And every time,
There's that saying that a way to make a little bit of money in publishing is to start with a lot of money.
a lot of money. Yeah, I know. But however, we have some time left. So I want to move on. I'm fascinated. How did you get a new Heinlein novel? I remember when you first started advertising that, and I remember when I first looked at it thinking, there's got to be a gimmick here. I mean,
There is no gimmick. Okay.
So
Actually,
anyway,
there
I'd like
was.
to know about that. So tell me.
Okay. Actually, there is a gimmick, but the gimmick predates all this. The gimmick was that when I was, looking for authors and trying to get some established names, most established names were through agencies. So for some reason or other, I got in touch with Eleanor Wood. And I just made up the thing and said, I'm going to be in New York, and I take you out to lunch. And she was kind enough to say yes, which I was not expecting because there was no trip to New York planned at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, again, bean counters, you think it's a crazy thing going all the way to New York. I'm in Maryland just for that. I said, I have a lunch with Eleanor Wood. Eleanor Wood represents a lot of people. Let me go to New York. So for that sole purpose, I ended up in New York just so that I could have lunch with Eleanor Wood. And that started off a really good relationship. Eleanor Wood is pretty sharp. She there are a lot of small publishers out there. And she started giving me a few of her authors to try it out. And there was one of Heinlein's book, Take Back Your Government, a non-fiction book. It was written in 46 or something. It's based on his political experiences that had just been lying around. And I said, why don't you give that to me? Nobody's really publishing it. And she said, fine. And that started me off on my journey with the Heinlein Prize Trust, which has been a very good partnership. They liked what I did with the book. And so they gave me a few of his fictions. And they really liked what I did with that, even though it was mostly in POD or whatever. But I would pay on time. As I said, I would give them much better rates. I used the magazine to push their books, and all that, introduce Heinlein to some of the newer readers who knew about him but had not read him. And so it developed into a really good relationship. And they've actually given me about 7 or 8 of his books, including Double Star, which is his first Hugo.
Oh, really?
Book. Yes, and we published Double Star. So it's not just a one-off thing. I mean, we've been working with them.
Have you published it yet?
Oh yeah, I can send you a copy if you would like. I mean, I've got
I love Double Star. It's one of my favorite books of Heinlein.
Okay, I'll send you a copy. Not a problem.
Shahid,
We have it both in hardcover and paperback.
Double Star was the first book I worked on when I started working with Shahid. It was the first book that I did with him. And it was my introduction to Heinlein, and you remember I love the book.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it did win a Hugo.
And but
it was his first book, in fact, that won a Hugo.
Yeah, it was his first Hugo winner. It was a big thing for me to get that. But to cut a long story short, they wanted me to republish The Number of the Beast. And art, and the relationship had gotten so good that Eleanor was perfectly comfortable me dealing directly with the estate. I discussed the monies with Eleanor, but everything else she said just work with Art Bueller because he's got his own ideas of how he wants to do things.
Okay.
So Art came to me and he said, yeah, we want to do Number of the Beast and we can give you that. And then this alternate version of his floating around, which is the alternate to The Number of the Beast. So I looked at it. It's not an alternate ending, whatever. It's like 80,000 new unpublished words of Heinlein, which is really a new book. So basically, that's how it started. And then when I approached them, they said, okay, since you brought it up and you were working on it, we'll give you the rights. It had some major problems, including certain copyright issues because he uses universals from other authors and all. So it took me a few years, about 3 or 4 years to work through all those. But finally, we had the book ready, and that was actually the start of the case at imprint because a new Heinlein needed to be in bookstores. And, and that's how we ended up with that. So, whatever else happens, my company may exist or not, but I got to publish a new friggin' Heinlein in my life.
I remember when it came out, I was just surprised by it. What surprised you the most about science fiction when you came into it professionally?
Okay, I came in from money management. I was a fixed income portfolio manager, so basically trading and all that sort of stuff. It's really the epitome of dog eat dog sort of a kind of an environment. Very cutthroat. Everybody, you're just trying to up the second other guy out all the time. the thing that has surprised me the most about science fiction is how much of a good community it is, and a close-knit community,
That is,
how, mu-
yeah.
and how much everybody is willing to help each other. Now, there are always exceptions. There are always exceptions everywhere in the world. That's fine. But by and large, I understand certain like big names and all that need to have certain barriers up there just for their own sanity. But if you approach them the right way, they're always willing to give up time. I mean, like, one of the reasons I've been successful has been people like Mike Resnick, who kind of took me under his wing. He was very much into the business side as well. He used to publish that column with Barry Malzberg. He didn't have to do that, but he did. He was the sort of person I could call at any time and say, Mike, I have this problem, or can you advise me on this? Or I need you to help me contact this person. And he would do that. Like I said, someone as big as George R.R. Martin gave me 3 stories for all of $100.
Yeah.
Just because it helps new authors, it helps new. But these are people at the top of their game, and they are perfectly willing to help a new publisher and new writers out. And it's a very different environment from that, from what I was used to. And that really did surprise me. I was not expecting that.
You're right. It's and it's funny because I think people from a distance, there's a lot of feuding goes on in science fiction too, especially over politics. And by the way, if anybody thinks this is new, go back to the 60s and, you'll find there was plenty of brawling going on then too. But there's always been a kind of, it is a community. I mean, and you're right about that. People, it's a very, whatever the opposite of dog eat dog is, this is what it's one of the things I really like about the science fiction and fantasy communities. People do tend to help each other out and look for each other. It's not just authors helping each other out too. It's helping out aspiring authors, new authors, and just for that matter, being gracious to fans and interacting with them, and not being some kind of snotty big shot. And there's no industry I know of that has a kind of well, of course, right now the pandemic has thrown a really major monkey wrench in it. But before the pandemic hit, there was not a weekend in the United States where there was not at least one science fiction convention happening. And that was true in many more countries than just the United States. I just, not too long ago, I had a fellow come up to me at a convention. It was from Turkey, and he told me there is a Turkish science fiction club, and as it turns out, a number of them read my 1632 series, and he wanted to pass on their appreciation that when I wrote about the Ottoman Empire, it was actually accurate. And he says a number of people who write about Turkey and don't screw it all up and I said, well, okay, but I have an expert, Stanley Robertson. He's the guy it's thanks to him I don't make too many mistakes about it. But I was, I was not expecting that, to be approached by somebody from Turkey about stuff I'm writing. And it was really nice.
This field connects us.
Huh?
This field connects us really well. A lot of the writers obviously write in their own little bubbles. A lot of the time it's a solitary job, but the conferences and that connect us together. And that I do want to say one thing. One of the reasons why Shahid has big names like Heinlein and you and Harry Turtledove and things like that is he's known for being very straight up. He pays straight away. Mm-hmm. He always pays the royalties. He's always pays, good advances for when he gets good authors. But we also like I've seen this in him, and it's also one of the reasons why I love working for him, is he's kind of created a family with our print, with our publishing company. And part of the reason why Mike really did give a lot to the company as well is by doing the magazine, it really created a community within our publishing company. And so the field in general is science fiction and fantasy field tends to be one big community of people that love the same interests. So we tend to, you know, like to pay it forward, or we like to help each other, or things like that. But I'd like to think that between what Shahid and Mike created from the start, they've created their own little community. We're a small press, but we can have big names because we're sort of a place that people feel happy in, I think.
Well, I can tell you this, I am one of Shahid's authors, and I was surprised at the size of the advance he gave me, because I wasn't expecting it for what was really a novella. And he paid royalties on time, and you know, it was very, on a purely professional level, it was very pleasant dealing with Shahid. But
Thank you. Appreciate
well, leaving that aside, Shahid's now been around for a while, and look, Shahid has a reputation throughout, at least I can tell you that, for authors, of being one of the nicest and most pleasant people to work with. And that's just my opinion. That comes from a whole lot of people. No, it's true. It's you know, there are some publishers you sort of take a deep breath and say, okay, I got to deal with them. And then there are publishers that it's a pleasure to deal with. And I'm fortunate because the publishers I've worked with, for the most part, and it's true of Bain, it's true of Shahid, have been. I honestly don't have any of the horror stories that you hear from some writers. Don't. I mean, which I think may be partly my good judgment in who I pick to work with. I want to ask you, so by the way, for any author watching this, if you've got some project you think might fit within what Shahid does, I urge you to approach him, because you know, it may be that it's not practical, whatever you got in mind, but you will not regret the experience. I can tell you that for sure. One question I have is, because we don't have a lot of time left, do you take on new authors, and if so, how do you get them? And what I mean by that is I, for instance, publish a number of new authors in my publishing house, but I don't accept unsolicited manuscripts. And the reason I don't is because if I did, I would just get flooded. And then what would happen is that people would not get a response for a year or two. And one of the advantages to a small press is that there's much less of a delay if you can get published of the whole process happening. So what I do is I have a filtering mechanism, which is, it's a number of different ones. Partly I'm an instructor at the Superstars Writing Seminar, so I meet new authors every year. And, you know, I can see their work that way. I'm also judging a Writers of the Future contest, so I see some that way. So, and my editor, Walt Boyce, has his own network. So, you know, there's a kind of filter that comes before we even see somebody. We're not just saying, hey, anybody wants to mail us something. But how do you do it?
Part of the filter is the magazine. It's how we meet a lot of the authors.
Through the magazine? Okay, all right.
Yeah, that's part of the filter. But Shahid,
that is the one big advantage to having a short fiction outlet is, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And actually, it's true for us because we launched Granville Gazette as a purely 1632 series magazine, which is still the heart of it, but we do every issue publish at least one general interest science fiction fantasy story. And yeah, we meet new authors that way. Yeah. Okay. So that's one way.
Yeah, that's one way. But on the publishing side, we actually do not right now take unsolicited submissions.
You what?
We do not take unsolicited submissions.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's mostly by invitation only.
Right.
And the reason is that I would love to take some, but I mean, just to give you an idea with the Kasich thing, I have all these books I told you, they're coming up. I have a new novel by Ben Bova coming out. I have a new novel by Harry Turtle that's coming out in November. We've got an anthology which has been edited by Kat Rambo for that.
Okay.
These are all that just kind of because, you know, I meet people, discussions, these just kind of fall into place. I just don't have the time to accept more projects and do justice to them.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
You know, when Harry Turtle came to me with this new novel, and he said, Shahid, I want to do a book for you. And I said, I can't afford the advance you get. And he said, what will you pay me? And I said, okay, this is the number. He said, done. I'm not going to say no to that. So that's what I do. And at some point, hopefully, I can get big enough where I can start accepting your authors. Now, having said that, we are trying a couple of things. There's a new author called Doug Danrich, who was a self-published author, who's doing a military science fiction book for me. And in fact, he's going to do a series probably on that. In fact, he's working on the second book. So we are trying that. But again, I think we will be moving into that, but a lot of it probably will be younger writers. We've established relationships through the magazine.
If you don't have the filter, the problem is you've got to hire readers. It becomes a major operation. And then what happens, even if you got the budget to be able to afford to do all that, you'll get so many manuscripts that the speed at which you'll be able. I have a writer, a very good writer, that I've started publishing his first book. We just published his first book a couple of weeks ago. His name is Nathan Dodge. And Nathan's going entirely through me, and he's good enough, in my opinion, that he could get published through a major commercial publisher, but he's getting along in years. And, he said, Eric, I don't know how much time I got left, but I sure as hell don't want to have to wait 2 years to hear something, and then another year before it gets published. Whereas, if you approach me, and I'm sure it's with you, if you can get through that, but you have to figure out a way to make the connection in the first place, the process will move much more quickly. Anyway, there's another panel here that will be discussing this. But one of the things that happens is, I'm going to be launching a new series by David Brin. And, and he's starting it with me, not, a major publisher. And there's several reasons for it. One of them, they're short novels that a major publisher wouldn't touch. But for what we do, it works fine. But I think the other is just he's known me for years. We've been friends for years. We both like each other's writings, and he just figures, hell, this will be fun. That's a lot of what happens. Anyway, we are out of time. But again, I want to repeat this to authors and aspiring authors. But you have to be able to figure out a way to reach Shahid that's manageable for him. Is that this is a wonderful publisher. I'll just put it that way.
Well, thank you. But just one small comment. All those list of authors I gave of the books we are publishing. Which name is missing from that list? I'm just kidding. Okay.
All right, but look. I did publish a book through you, and the problem you've got now is you've got really difficult competition because I have my own publishing house. So if I don't publish through Bain, then, and this book you can see right back here, I published it, and it's let me adjust the camera so you can see the title. This is the first book in a series. My co-authors and I just came out with the second one. I took this to Bain first, and I understood Tony wanted some changes in it, and I understood why. I mean, I didn't think she was nuts or anything. I understood exactly why she felt the way she did. I then took it to Jen Gunnels over at Torn. I think Jen's a terrific editor, and Jen had pretty much the same reaction Tony did. But I didn't really want to rewrite it because I liked it the way it was, So I talked to my two co-authors because, I said, look, here's the thing. We can do a pretty major rewrite, and they liked it the way it was too. So it's a little quirky, I know that, but we said the hell with it. We'll just, we don't sell as many copies.
I'm just giving you a hard time, Eric. Yeah, I know that.
I know you are. But I do feel I owe you an explanation because we've worked together off and on for years.
Yeah.
And
we will work together on something else.
Also, when you were running Sailing for Success, boy, that was a lot of fun.
Yes.
That was one of those projects again that, actually, I know you sort of basically broke even on it as far as money goes, but the real problem is the amount of work you had to put in.
It is.
And that's the other side, is what economists call opportunity cost. It may not cost you money, but if you're putting enough work into something, that means you're not doing something else, and you can only do that for so long. All right, well, listen, our time is up, although
thank you.
Everybody should stick around because there's, we have these half-hour autographing sessions in between panels, and you will be able to interact with Shahid and Lezli there. But for the moment, we have to close this down. Thank you very much for coming. And yeah, you're welcome, Shahid. Okay, and Lezli, it was nice seeing you again.